Massive tongue twister there, right? To pose your questions. I won't come. Let me just check here. Right. Babu Somyo, you are first off the bat. Honorable Van Minen, stand by.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. And good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Minister, the team, the head of unit SIU, colleagues and the media. Well, thank you very much, Minister, for the detailed brief which you have offered the committee, which set a form of a compounded response on the areas which have been raised by Mr. Ruyter. Mr. Ruyter is your former GCEO. I'm using it with an underlined thick line. Your former GCEO, meaning therefore, at whatever range, as an executive authority, as well as a shareholder in the institution he leads, you have had certain expectations. Could you just outline those expectations, which were at the head of your actual intended goal on having a character as the CEO in the name of Mr. Ruyter? That's the first question. And the second question, I'm just trying to chase these 15 minutes, so that you attend to the questions as I would outline them. The second area is that you have elaborately indicated that you don't have that report. You don't know that report. You have never influenced that report. Yours has been the role of a shareholder, of an executive authority, which would from time to time interact with the GCEO on matters of interest of the country and of the populace. So your interactions were basically objective in nature for the achievement of the ultimate requirement of Eskom to serve the population. Looking into what he has termed now, that whatever I've done not outside, not away from the executive authority, and in whatever form, my performance, my indulgence has been at the known by the executive authority. You have indicated that the report is not known to you. You don't have the report. But surprisingly, the funders are on record in saying they know the report, they have received the report. What would you take out of such an instance when you are the executive authority of the body Eskom and the former GCEO, his accountability, though to the board, in a large instance, is closer to the institution that you lead, and specifically yourself as the shareholder representative. Thirdly, my emphasis would always be on the knowing or not knowing that kind of a report. There is a point of emphasis to all those who would confess in knowing the report, that one, the report has given rise into what the President has outlined in the State of the Nation address as the intelligence report, and reference that report as per having impact on what has been done thereafter. Your own account here now is an indication of a series of events which come even before what is termed the start of the investigation, the finalization of that investigation, with the effect that yourself, when you are appointed in that office, you had to dig into some forensic reports, attend to such, work with the SIU in dealing with those matters. And I would take it that the brief to the President would have been the brief which is direct from the executive authority, which is yourself. Now then, how can anyone claim that such a report would have given rise to the reference by the President on the report which is not known to the executive authority, on the report which is not known to the board, and on the outcomes which are not necessarily known and you can account on? How would it be then that make a reference point and people celebrate that the outcome of such a report would have given rise to the acknowledgement by the senior office in the land as showing the result of that kind of investigations? Your comment in terms of that instance. You say to us here and now that it's you who went to the President and you insisted in that there must be intervention in Eskom, specifically the Eskom debt. And it has been your responsibility that you have found this a kind of action being attended to, even up to the current tabled budget by the Minister of Treasury. And how then on earth you would find out something which is not known to you, which is not known to any other accountable senior office, would find itself into the script of the President addressing the state of the nation. And therefore, people celebrate that the amount invested on the report is amount spent well in terms of the outcome of the report. Your comment around that instance. Yes, indeed. The question which went to the former chair of the board was prefaced on the fact that the primary responsibility of any board appointed is to ensure that there's accountability of those who are performing executive function in an institution. And therefore, in whatever instance, that body, which is an accounting body, accounting authority, would have to give guidance on whatever happens there. And the former chairperson will proudly say that that board was kept away from the information which relates to the outcomes of such an investigation. And the chairperson alone would know what is actually happening. That is in the name of the fact that the outcome, even the direction for such investigation, is driven by the fact that there's absolutely no trust to anyone. No trust to SSA, no trust to the police, no trust to everybody who has a responsibility to deal with all aspects that relate to the functionality of Eskom. That you don't know that report, does it reflect the fact that the same man the same GCO, the man you brought into the company, didn't have trust in you, that you don't have that report? And how can you deal with that aspect in terms of your understanding on your interaction exercises with the former GCO? And the second last question, which hampers on that, is that now we are aware, as you are aware, that that report has been funded outside of Eskom, outside of government, and it's only the portion of that amount which is known where it comes from. And the bigger portion is not known. In your summation, what do you think are the intentions of such a senior officer in an institution which has been categorized by government as a protected institution in terms of its information, in terms of its own infrastructure, and those who are supposed to act in it are supposed to act within a high intent of security, and the breach of such around this kind of an outcome. And the man has never been vetted. What is it that you could probably say to us as a committee, and with hindsight, in as far as those who are involved in the work of such a massive institutions as it is the case with Eskom? Lastly, Chairperson, this goes to the fact that even yourself, you term it a Ruyter project. The project is a start time and the end time. Has got the ultimate results and the objective. And in this instance, if this is the Ruyter project, and you are talking about a man who has been appointed as the GCEO of Eskom to keep the lights on, and the lights are not on, to keep the country warm, while in winter, the country does not enjoy that warmth, to ensure that we enjoy protection through light during day and night. That is not happening in the eyes of the former GCO. And the man is getting out with a thick document, which is his writing on his hands, even deserted by those who were thinking that they're going to produce the book, and the book is in his hand. Has he produced an exit report as a man who has left that institution? And what are the elements of that exit report as a man who has been employed in that institution to execute certain functions and duties? As you would know, you have been responsible for receipt of such and for demanding such as the man would exit the institution. Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson.
All right. Minister, over to you to respond to that. Honorable Van Minen, stand by.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Honorable Somyo for both his remarks and his questions. You asked what were the expectations of the GCEO. The very same things that I mentioned at the outset of my statement, which is that, as you pointed out, subsequently deliver electricity to all South Africans, ensure that there are efficient operations of the current generation fleet, whilst understanding that there will be an energy transition and that renewables, amongst others, might play a role and will play a role in generating power, which is already happening in South Africa. But as we stand today, more than 80 to 90% of our megawatts are actually generated by the existing fleet that we have. including what we get from Kahorabasa as well, which is about 1,300 megawatts. And when we use diesel, you can get up to 2,000 megawatts from the open gas turbine operations, and that is what uses diesel. It is to build up the expertise and professionalism, both at a management level and at an operational level, because we understand that the state capture process had seriously damaged those two levels of staff. Whilst there are good people there at Eskom, they needed to be reinforced. They needed to be constantly upgraded in terms of their skills and their training, and mentored so that they can perform the huge responsibilities that are placed on their shoulders. And with it must come the professionalism and integrity that is required, and the ethical conduct which is required as well. Anybody who runs an organization is going to check, do I have the people to deliver upon my mandate or not? And if I don't, how do I find them? Many good people and highly skilled people left during the 4 or 5 years of state capture. Many of them have been approached several times, not necessarily by him, but by others as well, to return to Eskom, but they wouldn't do so. Reinculcate the engineering discipline, the process part of the PP, the plant, people, and process issues that I referred to earlier on. Because in the reports and analyses that we've been provided with by experts, it's clear that this engineering discipline has been seriously weakened. And if we don't have a disciplined set of operators and who are familiar with the way in which an engineering organization operates, both they and the organization will find themselves in difficulty. I think he used to correctly point out, which I haven't done, that, for example, the non-payment by municipalities, and therefore the non-payment by people who reside in those municipalities of electricity charges is a growing element of debt to Eskom. But included in that debt is also large businesses that are, according to what I'm told, if you like, cooking up the meters so that they underpay compared to what they're supposed to be paying and get on top of that. Some of that happened, some of that hasn't happened. Make sure that the state funds are used wisely. And here, the expectation is that with modern technology, and in particular big data analysis that is developed now in many firms as a capability, and with the artificial intelligence tools that are appropriately designed, it's not as difficult to track down malfeasance in procurement processes. And I think a lot of money could have been saved. So was that happening adequately? Is a question that has to be raised. And above all, as I said, to ensure that there is an appropriate level of abidance by good governance codes and the promotion of integrity amongst the staff. He frequently pointed out that there were individuals around him that he didn't trust. But some of them are still there in their positions and should have been dealt with if there was sufficient courage to do so, which seems to appear only when something is written or a video clip is provided. Now, you make reference, Mr. Somyo, to the report. I don't know whether there is the report or whether there are those reports or whatever the case might be. but there appear to be reports. It appears that they were shopped at 4 media houses from about December last year, from what I'm told. And not all media houses bought into it, as I indicated to you from the quote that I gave, and some did, and published whatever it is that they published. But to believe that all of that is the truth about what is happening at Eskom is, I think, something that needs to be approached with a high level of skepticism. You then point out, and I've seen in an interview as well, that it appears that the business organization that provided some of the funding received a report. I don't know what that A report is. I haven't seen it, and it's something that you as COPA could pursue if you so wish. The link with SONA, the report, and so on, well, whatever allusions are made in that regard, as you correctly point out, are misplaced, and I'm not aware of any linkages in that direction. As far as the previous chair of the board is concerned, I mean, I have a high regard for Professor Makhoba as a scientist and for his own personal integrity, but I'm not sure whether he gave too much of leeway to the CEO during the period that they were on the board. It would appear so. No trust in state agencies, that would appear to be the case. At the same time, I think we must grant that there's a impatience amongst both yourselves, ourselves, and the South African public who want to see more people in orange overalls. And we can't deny that. So the law enforcement agencies need to take some product or the other which would create a greater sense of urgency and speed in their processes and demonstrate that we as South Africans are serious about tackling this issue of corruption. That he was not vetted, we left that to the board. But at one stage, the CEO did indicate to me that the SSA has been there to vet him, but he is not going to provide his personal financial information to the SSA because he doubted what would happen to it. Now, that was his choice. So it appears there have been several interactions, but he chose not to abide by that process, it would appear. So I just noted what he said on that particular occasion. Did he prepare and present an exit report? The intention was that he would stay on after he tendered his formal resignation to the board in order to provide the board with some space, if you like, to conclude the headhunting process of a new CEO and utilize that time on the one hand to provide continuity, but on the other hand to prepare his, or we would call it not the exit report, but a handover report. Similarly, the chair of SCOPA, as we reach the end of term of this administration, I imagine will prepare a handover report for whoever succeeds him in this position. So that's normal conduct that one engages in. You're coming back? Okay. I won't interfere with that process. And I won't micromanage it either. So in sum, Honourable Somyo, many of your observations are correct. But as I said, is there a report? Are there many reports? Who got the report? I've got a lot of other work to do, so I'm not going to spend my time just on this thing. There are many other projects that the Deputy Minister and I need to get off the ground. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable Van Minen, you will come back, Bab Somyo. Honorable Van Minen, over to you.
Thank you very much. And Minister, thank you very much for the input that you gave us. Now, just to start, you warned about the dangers of politicizing this process. However, I think we do need to understand that there are some facts that are very much common cause that leads us to where we are today. The ANC has been the ruling party since 1994. Decisions that go back to 1998 affected how Eskom had maintenance performed, how there was capital investment or no capital investment. So we've got a record of decisions going back 25 years that lead us to the situation we're currently in. In addition to that, I mean, we've had load shedding now since I think it's about 2008. So, I mean, that is literally a 15-year period. It's not something that has just sneaked up on us. And you're quite right, of course, when you say that we're now in a very serious crisis situation. This affects the economy. It affects people's ability to get work. It affects people's everyday life to the most nth degree. And it is probably the biggest crisis currently facing South Africans. And I think certainly we can accept that the vast majority of South Africans simply want this to be solved. They want Eskom to work, or if not Eskom, they want to know that they have a secure power supply, but that is going to continue. And we're all obviously wanting to work towards that goal. However, we can't step away from the fact that what we're seeing now is very much a result of poor policy choices, of an inability for various reasons to control corruption, state capture, theft. We're currently now seeing a situation where we see the currency in free fall, not in small part due to some rather dubious decisions regarding the situation with Russia and the Ukraine. I mean, this threatens all kinds of things, including AGOA. That includes the citrus industry, the motor vehicle industry, 500,000 jobs. We're really sitting in a very, very serious situation. But on the other hand, we have this very curious South African disease, which is to always shoot the messenger. I mean, we see it again and again and again. And in this particular case, one's now hearing, oh, well, you know, the previous CEO didn't do this, or he didn't do that, or he had a confidentiality agreement, maybe he should have done it differently. To a certain extent, that is really irrelevant to where we are now. The point is that there have been, and even before the book came out, we've seen at Scopa over the last few years, and certainly in the last 3 weeks, some very, very serious statements and allegations made, not just by Mr. Ruyter, but also by other players that have been here. Last week we had SAPS, the Hawks, the SIU, and the board who were here. And as the shareholder, Minister, it must be very concerning when you see what is coming from some of those sectors. So the Hawks, well, quite frankly, don't seem particularly interested in investigating allegations. They have all kinds of reasons why they're not investigating allegations. They bring up all kinds of excuses, including they didn't know, or it's not new. I don't know why not being new isn't grounds for investigation, but that's what was raised. Issues like that. The SIU is putting shoulder to the wheel, but their hands are very much tied by what it is they can investigate. And then the issue of the board is very, very serious. So it's supposed to be a board that is engaged. Well, quite frankly, Minister, I've never seen a board that is less engaged. The chair said, quite frankly, quite boldly to us, that the fact that there are allegations of serious corruption from political players in Eskom isn't Eskom's problem, because it's SAPS that was investigated. So he genuinely doesn't seem the slightest bit interested in pursuing any of these allegations. Now, this is the board that supposedly has oversight over this critical structure. So we're really sitting in a situation where serious allegations are made. Certainly at Scopa, we've been hearing serious allegations for some time. As you've said yourself, there have been many investigations and inquiries into Eskom over the years. But at the same time, there's a board and law enforcement that genuinely is disengaged and doesn't seem interested. In Afrikaans, there's a saying that says, "Dis die klein jakkalsies wat die oes eet," which essentially means that it's the small jackals in the fields that eat the crop. And we're really seeing a situation now where the very organs and bodies that are supposed to have oversight and investigate the very serious allegations that are happening don't appear to be doing that. So my question coming out of this to you is, as the stakeholder and as the minister, what is being done to ensure that these bodies are actually going to perform, that the board is engaged, that SAPS and the Hawks take seriously allegations that are made and have been made at several different levels? Because it's very important that we actually move forward. It's good and well to say we've had corruption for a long time. That doesn't normalize it. And we're at a situation now that is so critical that we really have to see movement going forward. Now, you talk about this report and about what you did or didn't know, and you say you don't have a copy of the report. And then you talk about the fact that the two names of political players have been raised, but there are preliminary investigations. Now, I'm not asking you for the names, but what I do want to know is, were you informed, even if it was at a preliminary level, of the names of people alleged to be involved with this? And if so, is there political will to pursue this, to see if there is anything to it, and to see where this is going? You talk about Mpumalanga being a crime scene. What is being done, again, by the law enforcement agencies, who last week genuinely seemed mystified by evidence raised about the cabals? So what is being done about that? Because, I mean, that connects to the coal, it connects to all kinds of issues related to state capture, not to mention the apparent love or even addiction that certain state players seem to have to coal-based energy, rather than moving forward to alternatives that could also assist with the reconstruction of Eskom and power supplies. State capture continues to be apparently deeply embedded in Eskom. And it really is a case now of scavengers just feeding off a carcass if nothing is done. Are we going to see the ship being moved? Is the ship actually going to shift? We can change deck chairs on a Titanic. It isn't going to stop the ship crashing into the iceberg if nothing is actually done. And then also what I want to touch on is the current acting CEO, Mr. Kasim, now says that he's not worried about a grid collapse. Well, if that is the case, what does he know that the rest of the country doesn't know? Have there been shifts that we aren't aware of? I mean, we're seeing blackouts and power cuts continuing on an enormous basis. We now are at a worse situation at this time of the year than during the whole of last year. So obviously the situation is getting worse. Why is he suddenly not concerned? And what are we seeing there? And does this have anything to do with his trips abroad? Because we really do need to know what is happening there. And then finally, when it comes to the Eskom debt, I think we also know that a large issue of the Eskom debt has been mismanagement and corruption at a lot of municipal level, in collecting arrears, in collecting monies that are owed. Again, we have yet to receive, and Eskom, Scopa has investigated this with COCTA, we've yet to see if there's going to be movement and assistance at that level to ensure that these municipalities are actually capacitated to be able to do their job, to ensure that debt is reduced. Because what's also happening on the street level, so to speak, is that the people who can afford to migrate to other alternatives, such as solar, are doing so. That means an enormous amount of people who do pay accounts and who have financial wherewithal are exiting the system. This is simply going to make the debt trap worse, because what it is going to do is leave the people on the grid who, for various reasons, are either paying their accounts and corruption is eating them up, or they're not paying their accounts, which means that Eskom is going to get to a situation where it's continuing to decay, it's continuing to essentially fester because of the internal problems, but there also won't be money coming into the system. So can we please also have some reassurance and some information on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Over to you. Honourable Hadebe, stand by.
Thank you, Chair and Honourable Van Menen. And I agree with a lot of what you said, surprisingly. We agree, at least, that we should not politicize this process. We agree that load shedding has been around. There have been mishaps in terms of delays in first deciding on building of Medupi and Kusile, and secondly, the delays in the construction and development of those projects themselves. And there have been lacuna, so to speak, as far as what was requested before the Ruyter's time and after his time, for 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts to be provided in whatever period, in order that there's the space to undertake the maintenance that is required. And you're absolutely right that the situation in Europe, certainly for the Northern Hemisphere, but elsewhere as well, has created volatility as far as energy markets are concerned. And hopefully we have peace in that area and some negotiations commence sooner rather than later. The one area where I disagree with you, this is not a mission to shoot the messenger. Mr. De Ruyter is not a messenger. He was in charge of an institution. He was responsible in terms of his contractual obligations, by virtue also of his position as CEO, for whatever Eskom did or did not do. And his expressions about corruption are nothing new. We've all said it before his time, during his time, and we'll say it after his time, which is the point I tried to illustrate earlier on. It's nothing new there. What is new and interesting, and the South African public would be interested in this, was he recording every conversation that he had with everybody? Was he more interested in writing a book that would mask his legacy as far as performance at Eskom is concerned? And is that what this book is about? Because if the message is there's corruption at Eskom, we've all heard it before. And that's not, as you correctly point out, the issue. The issue is what are you doing about it? And what are the law enforcement agencies doing about it at the end of the day? And what are each of us contributing to minimizing the possibilities of corruption? Because we want to see a society where this phenomenon does not exist in any form. So this is not about shooting the messenger. This is not this poor little guy that's being attacked. I mean, he goes into personal descriptions of all sorts, I hear. I haven't read the book. Is that necessary to give an account of what you did or didn't do at an institution like Eskom, in order to explain to people why Eskom is where it is today, after 3 years of his stint there at the end of this period? If you are in charge, you are in charge. If you are in charge, the buck stops with you. If you are in charge, you must show a sense of responsibility, and if you haven't accomplished your mission, show a sense of remorse. I'm sorry, South Africa. I tried my best. I couldn't do better than what I did. That's what was required. So, forgive me for disagreeing with you as far as that is concerned. And then you don't go around making allegations about individuals. That's character assassination to defend yourself. And some would say that's narcissistic behavior at the end of the day. But we're not here to analyze his psychology. we are looking at the far more important things as a country. On the question of the hawks, I mean, in the presentation to you, on slide 15, last week, but there was another slide as well. But in this particular slide, they say that there are currently 3 known investigations linked to the Ruyter, namely an alleged poisoning case in which Mr. De Ruyter is a complainant, alleged failure to lodge a Section 34 report in terms of PRECA, which I believe he did the day before he appeared before you, and what is this? Yeah. This is still pursuing the PRECA point. But where there's a slide 7, I think, where they say, this is still about Section 34. They say they made a number of attempts to approach him, and they couldn't find him. He wouldn't respond, etc., etc. But I'm aware, because he did tell me, that he went on to meet the head of the NPA. He met the head of Hawks. He met the head of SIU. He met the head of the South African police, amongst others that he might not have told me about. And those were all of his own initiative. Good, he took the initiative. And as I pointed out already, South Africans are impatient. They want to see people who are messing up their lives in orange overalls. And I don't care where they come from or what their origins are. If they are guilty of engaging in this kind of conduct, then the law must take its course. You say the board is not engaged. In fact, they're quite engaged, but I think what you found was a board that is still finding its feet in a very complex environment, probably. I haven't been through any recording, but I've heard bits and pieces. I will check with the chairperson about the issue that you are raising, and certainly make him aware of their responsibility in this regard. And as a shareholder, we will make sure that the board applies its minds. But I don't think it would be fair to say that they are not engaged in this particular instance. At the same time, we should not have expectations of a board about work that a law enforcement agency should be doing. That might be a bit of an unfair burden that we are placing on the board itself. You say that as a shareholder, I must make sure that these bodies intervene, stroke work, stroke do their bit. And that is why I've set up any number of discussions, interactions, and ensure that action was taken. And I'll give you one other illustration outside of Eskom. The issue of cable theft is a big issue as far as Transnet is concerned. So this is probably going into 2022. With the assistance of Mr. Mufamadi, senior police officer, the Transnet security people, and others were brought together at my behest, and we discussed how the police in particular, but other law enforcement agencies, could mitigate the issue of cable theft. It had some impact in some areas, but there's 30,000 kilometers of rails. It's hard to monitor all of it. We also, at a particular point in time, I'm not sure what the status is today, had the industry working with us, particularly on the Ermelo-Richards Bay line. Drones were made available, people on the ground were made available, and that did have an impact in those places where the monitoring was taking place in order to minimize either cable theft or any other kind of interference on the line. So these matters have been raised in various fora, but I hear you, and to the extent that it is within my capability, but it's also a matter that you could raise with Professor Mufamadi, who is better placed to intervene in these regards, so that we can get more action going on this particular front. Is there the political will to pursue the two names or more names? Well, I think we're all aware by now that there was a Brigadier Berger who was involved in one way or another in this project. And in that instance, that's an indication of the fact that the SAPS is aware. And now, if this gap between information and evidence is narrowed in some way, the law enforcement agencies must do what they have to do. We can't instruct them to do anything. And that, I think, has been an important precedent that the President has set as well, that there shall not be any kind of interference with the work that they have to do as far as law enforcement is concerned. Excuse me. On the question of debt, I think you make a valid point that if we're not careful, if too many people go off-grid, Eskom's revenue will decline over time, and its capabilities will therefore decline as well. But what we have to look at and start modeling, and some of that work has been done, is what would a new transmission company bring in as cash, because it will generate funding of its own. And I've had now 2 or 3 interactions with the China Grid Company, which is the largest transmission company in the world. And the way they run their show, including the 68%, I think, control they have in the Portuguese grid and a similar control in the Philippines grid, shows that this is an area where, if you like, a new business model will begin to emerge, where how you make money as an energy entity begins to change over time. Your point about grid collapse, Mr. Kasim is speaking the truth. And essentially, what he is saying is the following, that in South Africa, through the kind of expertise that we have deployed in Eskom and that they have been able to retain in Eskom, what the levels of load shedding does is to manage the supply-demand equilibrium and to ensure that the transmission grid works, as it seems to work elsewhere as well, again, subject to correction, at 50 megahertz. And what they do at the control center is to watch that number 50. If it falls below 50, they release a pump storage station or they operate an OCGT to again get the supply right so that 50 megahertz is targeted again. Secondly, the purpose of levels of load sharing is precisely to ensure that the grid does not collapse, that all of us will make a contribution actively or passively in order to make sure that the appropriate level of demand is operating at the right time in order to manage the supply that is available at that particular point in time. A grid collapse is where there's a total mismatch between demand and supply, where there is no buffering and safety factor built in, and where you have what people elsewhere in the world call blackouts. It's happened in California many times, in the most advanced economy at this stage in the world, but it's happened elsewhere as well. Texas was a recent example in the United States as well. And when he says they don't think that they would get there, is that he's actually explaining that we've built in enough buffers through levels of load shedding to manage the equilibrium between supply and demand. And that is why it's quite important that all of us support, if you like, demand-side management. How we put off geysers, how we use our kettles, how we leave lights on or off, and so on, can save up to 1,000 megawatts a day. And that can make an important contribution to managing this balance between supply and demand as well. So be assured that we have some very good professionals operating in the systems operator area, and we will make sure that they are very frank in the assessment of where we find ourselves, and equally frank with the public about what to expect as well. And whilst being realistic on the one hand, my colleague, Dr. Ramakopa, will be doing whatever he can to ensure that as many units stay online as possible during this particular period. And the operator level expertise is reinforced in an appropriate kind of way where required. And at the same time recognize that we are in a particularly bad situation because of the 3 units at Kusile not being available and the 1 unit at Kuberg undergoing the refurbishment that it is undergoing, which gives us a loss of approximately 3,000 megawatts, which you would normally have in a winter situation. So this is an extraordinary set of circumstances that we find ourselves in. But if there's anything new, Chairperson, we'll make sure that you're aware of it. Thank you.
All right. No, thank you very much, Minister. I know that, excuse me, I know that there's a plethora of issues related to Eskom which we would want to look at, but may I implore us not to lose sight of the primary reason why we are here. So I'm just craving your indulgence, colleagues, also as part of time management to make sure that we give all members an opportunity and they get ample time. Right, Honorable Hadebe, your 15 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister and your team. Thank you so much for availing your time to answer into these very sensitive and damning allegations. I think I must premise my address by saying, indeed, as the Chair, and you have alluded to the fact that we always endeavor as a committee to uphold the principle of natural justice, the audi alteram partem rule, that no one should be condemned unheard. So the exercise today is precisely for that reason, to ensure that we do not unfairly condemn others without having an opportunity to be heard. I just want to thank you for your time. We now know that questions that I wanted, the very serious, straight pointed questions that I wanted to raise, and you have assisted in answering those questions. And we now know that, as you have responded and alluded to, that the information given was unverified and unsubstantiated in relation to the names, and one wouldn't want to go into character assassination and defamation of character based on information that is not verified and unsubstantiated. We now know that Mr. De Ruyter refused to be vetted, yet he went on to institute intelligence investigations. Furthermore, we now know that that report was not, based on what we have alluded to, submitted to Eskom, yet the BL SA is in possession of such a report. I want to strongly say that action speaks louder than words. We therefore cannot say Mr. Director's action are irrelevant. We need to question and understand Mr. Director's question in order for us to be able to understand the intentions. So you have well detailed what it is that you have done. You've also furnished us with the volumes of documentation containing what it is that you have done. So my first question will be, did the former group chief executive provide evidence to you when he shared his concern on corruption, and did he make any submission which reflect that he had reported this issue as required by Section 34, subsection 1 of PRICA? I'm raising this because Mr. Director is just not an ordinary whistleblower. He had a responsibility and duties to act in a certain manner. The second question, Honorable Minister, what do you think of Mr. Director's tenure at Eskom? I'm not sure at this stage whether I should continue calling him a former group chief executive or an aspiring author. In your understanding, was it an utter failure where KPIs were hardly achieved, or was it a challenging time and probably Mr. Director and his executive did not have the capacity to deal with the complex and difficult problems of Eskom? Does the minister think that Mr. Director response to us when he appeared before us lacked the straightforward information, is just another attempt to cover up his failure? My third question, Honorable Minister, you have already alluded to the fact that Mr. Director was operating, to quote your own words, operating on his free will, and for 6 months you did not know anything about Project Director. Now, good corporate governance demand that the director must use the position of director or any information obtained while acting in his capacity as a director knowingly to cause harm to a company and its subsidiaries. Given these duties, do you think Mr. Director used the information which he obtained whilst a group chief executive of Eskom, and he used this information to his advantage, and secondly to disadvantage Eskom? I'm asking this because he called a press conference and later now there is a book. Do you think, in line with good corporate governance, Mr. Director compromised Eskom and he used the information obtained as a group chief executive to disadvantage Eskom and to further his interest? The legal principle, Mr. Honorable Minister, of fiduciary duties of a director, which all of us are familiar with, there's a certain duties that one needs to meet, and it's to raise a standard of good corporate governance behavior. These include the duty to act in good faith, loyal, as well the duty to act in the best interest of the company. Now, in light of these fiduciary responsibilities, Honorable Minister, would you say Mr. Director has executed his fiduciary responsibility well, or has he failed in his responsibility? I'm asking this because he failed to alert the institutions that are responsible and are obliged to ensure accountability, institutions such as parliamentary portfolio committees. Some of the information that was raised in the interview, even though majority of such were not new, but there was certain information that we had for the first time, and he appeared before us on several occasions. Would you say, given such standards that I've earlier highlighted, Mr. Director failed in his duties in terms of ensuring that parliamentary committees are informed and kept abreast of all these allegations? Now, I know that you are not taking a stand, Honorable Minister. You just merely been afforded an opportunity to unearth the truth, correct the lies if there are any. Mr. Director, in his interview, he said one minister uttered the following: in order to pursue the greater good, you have to enable some people to eat a little bit. Mr. Director further alleged that there was one particular high-level politician involved in these allegations of corruption, and when he informed a minister, the minister looked at the senior official and said, I guess it was inevitable that it will come out anyway. I'd like to ascertain and confirm or deny whether these allegations made by Mr. Director, this minister, that we are not told, but we now know in the submission that some of these were attributed to your good selves. And having served with you for years and having known you, would you please be so kind to confirm whether or not these are indeed true, so that we take the South Africans into confidence? I'm raising this based on our duty and responsibility as enshrined in Section 92 of the Constitution, that we have a duty and a responsibility to ensure that cabinet members collectively and individually are accountable both on the execution of their powers and their functions to Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson and Honourable Hadebe. Audi alterum partem is a useful concept, legally very appropriate, but I have to emphasize I'm not here on trial. So you can ask me to help you to clarify certain things, but I want to be quite emphatic that I've done nothing wrong that I have to explain myself on. And the culprits who have done something wrong can come here and account for themselves. So, whilst I might be pilloried in certain quarters, my own record speaks for itself in serving the public of South Africa for 5 decades. Secondly, you correctly point out that unverified information should not and cannot be used in any legitimate way, but that nor should character assassination be allowed to be perpetrated in this forum or in any other forum. If somebody has done something wrong, let them account for it in an appropriate manner. The CEO, you say, had some evidence. Did he report this information? I don't know. Like I said earlier on, he's met a lot of the law enforcement agencies himself. There is the Section 34 report that he lodged prior to meeting with you have a post-nasal drip that you need to attend to. As an ex-pharmacist, at least I can help you on that. Yeah, I'm under treatment too. Yeah, I treat myself. So I wouldn't know what is reported and what is not reported, and what the nature of his Section 34 report was also. But I think we found the slide which I was referring to, which is slide 17 from the Hawks, what I referred to earlier on, which said to you, the DPCI through Major General Gerber, the provincial head in Mpumalanga, reached out to Mr. De Ruyter immediately after his media interview to ascertain the information firsthand. Mr. De Ruyter declined to meet Major General Gerber, but referred him to his lawyer, Mr. Willem Janse van Rensburg, who promised to talk to Mr. De Ruyter and revert to the DPCI. Unfortunately, the promise was not fulfilled. So that's the level of cooperation. So on the one hand, you have a couple of years during which law enforcement is not doing enough, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, you have a situation where law enforcement is trying to find out what are you saying and what's the basis upon which you're saying it, and he refuses to cooperate with them. But I suppose that's what melodrama is about at the end of the day. And all of us fall for it to some extent or the other. You asked me to assess his tenure and whether his KPIs were met. And I think we're not here to evaluate performance, but at the same time, you are right. The situation he entered at the beginning of 2020, soon after which you had the COVID pandemic shutdown, where, for example, certain things that needed to be done at Coburg a little bit later in 2020 couldn't be done or was delayed because of travel issues across the border in between, say, South Africa and France. I think it was in that instance. So the situation was a tough one. He inherited an organization that was still being rebuilt and that had found itself with financial constraints as well. But you applied for the CEO's job. You were interviewed by 4 ministers. Before that, you were interviewed by the board. You accepted the job. You said, as you accepted the job, I'm willing to take a salary cut in the national interest. Quite contrary to what is happening now in terms of the approach to the national interest question. So then you take responsibility for what you inherit. And secondly, you change what you inherit. And thirdly, you ask for help where that is appropriate. And I've outlined a number of things that we've tried to do and others have tried to do in order to assist, to the extent that you now have, as of the 25th of July last year, a National Energy Crisis Committee where the whole of government is involved in trying to assist Eskom recover from whatever the issue is that affects it. So, 2 points. The first is he covering up his failure. Regrettably, it would appear that some human beings find it hard for their egos to take a knock. And I believe there's something in the book about Nampak as well. So you've got to keep explaining yourself as to why you find yourself reputationally in a particular position. And in this instance, you do it, as you are hinting, and to use your words, cover up his failure. He didn't fail entirely. I think the work that he did in relation to the just energy transition was good, although he showed very poor accountability. And so that was another example of a lone ranger operating, going to overseas meetings, meeting people that should be met at a political level, for example, and so on. But I'm sure as a retort somewhere along the line, when he appears on one or other platform in the coming days, he'll retort to all of that. But that initiative was a necessary one, and one that we need to pursue, as I said, within the kind of conditions we find ourselves in as far as South Africa and its relationship to coal and transition away from coal is concerned. The second issue is the one that all of you are raising, which is, has the performance of the plant. So forget about, I believe it says somewhere, I'm not a strategist, I can't think strategically because you need to have a 20-year view. We'll leave that aside for now, but merely say if you want to get to the 20-year view you hold, you better cross the 3-month bridge first, otherwise you'll fall in the river. And the river here is the performance of the current plant. And what is it that you did to ensure better maintenance, higher quality of operators, and to make sure that if plan A failed, there was a plan B that you were open to listen to? So what is singularly lacking, and has been lacking, is a simple thing called humility. And all of us require it from time to time, whatever level of arrogance we might have assumed about ourselves. Because if you don't have humility, you don't have the ability to listen. You don't have the ability to reflect. You don't have the ability to take other people's ideas if your ideas are not good enough in this situation. Well, that's what I learned over 50 years of activism. It might not apply to these very sophisticated people who think they're much better than all of us, put together or individually. Does one think that he used information obtained from Eskom to the disadvantage of Eskom? I certainly think so, because what you find in all of the commentary emerging, from him, but also from the commentariat, is about what bits of what happens in Eskom, not all of it, because I don't think anybody can put the complexity of what goes on in that institution and make that jigsaw puzzle look intelligible at the end of the day. So again, I think no serious CEO of a serious institution, private or public, as I said earlier on, would break the kind of contract you sign and the obligations, as you correctly point out, that come with not just your fiduciary responsibilities, but as your responsibilities as a CEO of an institution. And everything now is about enhancing one individual's reputation and making sure that anyone who stands in the way is lathered with one or other kind of brush to indicate how stupid they are, how inadequate they are, how idiotic they are, because at the end of the day, as some people have pointed out to me, there's only one hero in town. And you can judge that for yourselves. Even the interview, as I said earlier on, Chairperson, you could have had a, if you like, a technical interview which says, this is what I was able to do, this is what I was not able to do, these were the constraints I faced. But it was a fascinating 3-year experience. And I hope I've left the institution better in respect of A and B and C, and I think I haven't done enough in respect of X and Y. That will demonstrate a measured approach. It will demonstrate an exit nature of the discussion. But no, here you have to malign individuals, but then extend, as I said earlier on, to utilizing swat kafar tactics, which everybody conveniently forgets when they write what they write. You know, it really, for those of us that were activists during the 70s and 80s, reminds us about what the state, apartheid state, in particular P.W. Botha and company, utilized to mobilize white voters at the time. And how they were able to characterize all of us as terrorists of one kind or another. So does that mean that all of this is about politics, in addition to being about some personal issues? That's a question that you have to ask yourselves, I think. One minister saying must enable some to eat. Well, I haven't seen anybody who's so hungry for whom I must say they must eat inappropriately and eat public funds. No, I will not say anything like that. Nor will I tolerate anything like that. And as I said repeatedly in our interactions this morning, I don't care where you come from. If there's evidence against you in respect of corrupt activity, pay the price. End of story. So that something might come out at the end of the day. Well, it might not, depends on what goes on. But the suspicions have been cast far and wide as far as his assertions are concerned. So I will not tolerate corruption, bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Honorable Pukas, and then Mazamban, stand by. Honorable Pukas, your 15 minutes starts now.
Thank you,
Honorable
Honorable
colleagues, we got on time, so come back. Honorable Pukas.
So yes, second round.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Minister, thank you that you give us some clarities on some of the issues. This engagement, Minister, is part of a list of engagements, not necessarily to show how important the interview was, but to clarify South Africans on what has happened, what is still happening, and also the view of the different stakeholders. So there are also some interventions from your side, as you alluded to, and we will appreciate progress on those interventions as it unfolds. Mr. De Ruyter, Minister, took the initiatives to engage with some of the institutions, but none of those institutions have a report or hard evidence about what is happening. And one is asking who's fooling who now. Is he playing to the gallery or what is happening? So, but as SCOPA, we must do our oversight without fear or favor. And it is exactly for that reason that I wanted to state. I was so surprised when I hear the content of the Ruyter's interview, and especially his distrust in a state where he was still an official. So, Minister, did you by any chance after that interview try to engage with the Ruyter on those allegations? Secondly, Chair, one of the allegations of Mr. De Ruyter is also that many of the new appointments were the confidence of the minister. What he said by implication is that the appointees don't necessarily have the qualifications. it doesn't say in which field, however. It boils down for me to the fact that Eskom is collapsing based on officials who don't know what to do, and this is why we are sitting in this crisis of load shedding. And it is also embarrassing for the current government, and I'm not speaking about the ANC, I'm speaking about the government as a whole. So, Chair, Minister, can't the government take action against the Ruyter? Because at the time of the interview, he was still the accounting officer of Eskom. Then did the Ruyter ever present a report to you on where corruption is taking place, specific sites where corruption is taking place, how he planned to deal with it? Then, Minister, during the tenure as Group CEO, did the Ruyter had a capacity, and his executive had a capacity to deal with the problems of Eskom, or did he ever table a progressive turnaround strategy to you as a minister? Chair, I can't help to also speak about this intelligence report or the 50 million. There was a 18 million from BLSA. And for me, maybe, I don't know, Chair, 32 million is a lot of money. It can't just happen that you got it somewhere. And it's so difficult for me to understand that only the Ruyter is aware, like the minister was saying, I don't know if I hear correctly, that he got weekly reports on the investigation of the Ruyter, not the minister, got weekly reports on the investigation of that intelligence report. I want to understand that 32 million. And Chair, from where I'm coming from, with that 32 million, we can build a lot of houses, clinics and everything. So that's why I'm saying that where does that 32 million coming from? And if it was from Eskom, why is it that the Ruyter never account to Eskom about that report? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. Let's get responses to that, and then Honorable Lisi will come in.
Thank you, Honorable Bierkus, and we certainly want to help to get as much clarity in the public mind, the objective public mind as possible, and ensure that South Africans understand, as you said, what is really at play in this situation, notwithstanding the political climate that we find ourselves in. So is this an instance of playing to the gallery? I think in addressing Honorable Hadebe's question, the few people who've gone through the book or his various articles, which I haven't, indicate this in very simple terms. The only hero in South Africa is the Ruyter. The rest of us are all fools. And only he knows what's best. Only he knows, like I said earlier on, what corporate governance means and doesn't mean. And the rest of us are still in our nappies, apparently, and need to just stand at his feet and learn from him. So there's certainly a case to be made to suggest that. Did I engage with him after the interview? I was shocked at the interview and its content. Somebody sent me a clip. I forwarded the clip to him, expecting a response. No response came, to the best of my recollection. So no, it is the board that interacted with him. It's a board that met and asked itself the question, what do we do in this environment? Having said the kind of things he said, should he still remain at Eskom, or should he exit as he had indicated last year? And they made the decisions, and they, as the board, informed him of their position in this particular regard. I was informed by the board, but I didn't engage with the CEO himself. Appointing people without qualifications, I didn't quite get the question, but if there's any hint that I wanted him to appoint people without qualifications, that's absolute nonsense. I've built many institutions in my time and appreciate the value of professionals and experts, and more importantly, retaining them within your own organization. And Eskom, more than any other organization, doesn't only just require so-called experts on paper. What one learns in the Eskom situation, and I suppose in many other types of businesses as well, is that experience counts. So what you need to do is to combine experience with expertise or qualifications and get people to grow in that environment. Use the wisdom that comes with experience, but use your qualifications that teaches even maybe the old-timers some new technological tricks that they, in their time, might not be aware of. When I first started interacting with staff and engineers at Eskom, some of them would say, and you might have heard me say this to you as well, in Scopa and elsewhere, that the really experienced power station managers who stick around for 10, 15, 20 years at a particular power station don't have to look at the dials on the operating equipment. All they do is they listen to the sound of the mill, or they listen to the sound of the turbine, or they listen to what's happening in the burner and the boiler, and they can tell whether something is wrong or not. And then they go and investigate. So that's what comes with experience. And one of the things we've certainly learned in my time is it's important to retain experience and at the same time grow new talent within an organization as well. I'm not sure whether that happened in an appropriate way in this environment. Eskom used to be a phenomenal organization and ran a phenomenal academy to train engineers and so on. And in my recent interactions around the form that holding companies take in different parts of the world, I came across, I think it's a Malaysian example, where the, say, transport sector would have its own college. It'll have its own academic courses and training courses for people that will eventually end up in the transport sector as well. In the energy sector, they'll have an energy college, and they will grow and teach and educate and prepare people to join the energy sector also. So there are examples in other parts of the world that we could learn from. And some of our institutions, particularly the training capacity, has not been revived as it should have been, regrettably. Taking action against the CEO, I'll bring that to the attention of the board. They might be discussing it, I don't know, and make them aware of this possibility, but ultimately it's for them to decide. As he indicated, where corruption takes place and how he's dealing with it. Yeah, there've always been examples available, like the Majuba example I gave earlier on, when the president and the rest of us visited the Tutuka power station. And as you walk around the grounds of the power plant, you see this big yellow equipment. And we were told by the managers there that these are what are called compressors. And they are forced to hire those compressors and renew the contract for the hiring on a regular basis with the same people. If you bought that equipment, you would have saved tons of money. But it's nice to illustrate the point. And your question is a valid one, which says, having understood that this is what is going on in that environment, what have you done about it? In fairness to the local staff, I think what is important to know is that in power stations that are in far-flung areas, people do live under fear. They are scared because if they talk about X or Y and what they're involved in, next thing they will get a phone call which says, we know where you live, we know where your children's school, we know what you drive, and so on, to strike fear in the individual concerned. So it isn't an easy life for people who operate in power stations. And so to some extent, the CEO's concerns around law enforcement taking a stronger stance are valid. There's no doubt about that. But ultimately, we've got to also create an environment in South Africa where our own communities don't do things or hide things or support people who are engaged in these sorts of activities, because at the end of the day, load shedding then affects everybody, not just the few who are engaging in this nonsensical activity or harmful activity. Plans for turning Eskom around, there have been many plans, as I said, over the years. Parts of each of them would have worked to some extent, and there are huge possibilities to take Eskom in a new direction, given the restructuring stroke unbundling exercise, where significant parts will be completed by the end of this year. And that provides an opportunity to change the culture, to change mindsets, to introduce new systems of control, which is what Scopa would be interested in at the end of the day. The 32 million, did it come from Eskom? I think we've been told that none of the cash came from Eskom itself. But that's what we were told. There's no evidence that anybody has unearthed which indicates that the 32 million out of the 50 million came from Eskom. It might have come from other private individuals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. You speak about the training colleges. I'm reminded of the teacher training colleges that were in KZN, Ntuzuma, Nogqigazi, and so on. All right, Honorable Liz, over to you. Honorable Liz says is going to use his 15 minutes, one question. So, Honorable Liz, your 15 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had the privilege earlier of being granted a new title by the Minister. So here goes for Special Agent Mazamban. Not quite, but I suppose that's a good story. Minister, you say that you were shown a diagram and there were names on it. So I understand that you have this view that you need concrete evidence, and surprisingly, unlike the SIU, the Hawks and the SAPS last week indicated they don't investigate unless they're given evidence. And you're suggesting the same thing here. However, did you at least go and approach these two senior politicians and say, listen, guys, I've seen a diagram with your names on it. It's a diagram of cartels and heads of cartels. You know, what's your response? Did you do that?
Minister, Honorable Liz is requested to use his 15 minutes by posing a question. Get a response, yeah.
I think your Mazamban's memory and yours is probably equally good enough for now to remember my questions as I go along, Mr. Minister, but you're free to write them down.
I think the Hawks were obviously saying the right thing, and unfortunately I have lawyers next to me on my left who would say the same thing as well. And I've indicated to you that certain news outlets also took a similar stance, that they're not going to publish stuff or material purely on base of assertions. And if I see a name somewhere, and if I don't know how much of validity it has, how do I go to someone and say, I saw your name, what do you got to say?
Okay, so you didn't go, Minister, so, I mean, that's fine.
No,
I mean,
you had your question, let me give my answer.
Well, as long as it doesn't use up my whole 15 minutes.
Okay.
Oh,
See, this is
Chairperson.
Precisely why I was
Yeah,
on the
no, then
set
you must
of
give me your
questions.
questions and I'll answer them all at the same time.
Right. Minister, round up your response. Round up your response.
Sorry?
Round up your response to the question. You said you weren't done.
Yeah, no, I'm not done. But I don't want interference either.
Okay, that's why I'm saying round up your response.
Yeah. Mr. Lee is up to his usual stuff.
See, now he's going to respond, you see. So
yeah,
let's
no,
rather stick to the questions and answers.
No, that is part of my response to him. I have the freedom to speak in this forum. And I am saying that your question doesn't have any validity, and that is not the basis on which anybody would be operating. And you know it. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. So, yeah, it's unfortunate. I would have thought that would be a response, just a collegial response, if nothing else. Minister, you've just returned, I understand, from China, a visit to China, and you were accompanied by the acting Eskom GCEO, and that trip was apparently a trip involving Transnet. So my question is, what was the purpose of taking the Eskom Group CEO out of the country at a crisis time of load shedding? Did it have something to do with your earlier comments just now about China grid? Is this something that, are we looking at using that? And then from the Transnet point of view, were you successful in getting a deal negotiated on the supply of parts or locos or whatever it was that required attention?
So the Transnet work is still work in progress, and when I'm ready, I will inform the public and government accordingly. On the question of the acting CEO, there was an offer of assistance in the current environment that we find ourselves in from various entities in China, and I'm not qualified to assess what is needed or what is offered. And there were the acting CEO and two others who were in a position to interact with various entities there and establish for themselves what could be done. Similarly, we have offers from other countries as well, where similar interactions take place. Sometimes they result in positive outcomes. Sometimes the fit isn't actually right, so to speak. So all of that is work in progress. All of that is intended to ensure that the kind of crises or challenges that we face in the sectors that these SOEs are involved with are resolved as quickly as possible. and in as constructive a way as possible. So I'm optimistic, let's put it that way, that there will be a good outcome. But as I said, there are some issues that are still work in progress. And when we are ready, we'll make the public announcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The Eskom board chair, who I'm afraid doesn't give me a great deal of confidence about the fixing of Eskom, informed us last week that the board had a short list of new CEOs or GCEO, and they were to be interviewed last Friday. You earlier said that Ruyter was interviewed by 4 ministers. Did the interviews of the board of the GCO take place on Friday? And will there be further interviews involving you and other ministers? And when can we expect an announcement?
I'm not aware about the interviews on Friday because I haven't had time to catch up with what the latest developments are, which I will do in the next day or two. Obviously, all of us would want a new CEO in place sooner rather than later. I'm aware that there were long lists and short lists and shorter lists and so on that the board was engaged with. As the board chair has indicated publicly 10 days ago or so. And I'll await, firstly, a report from the chair and the board on what progress they've made, and determine then what process needs to be followed. But the first process, as I indicated earlier as well, is the one that the board needs to conduct. So let's see what they come up with.
Thank you, Minister. So the second part of my question is there going to be ministerial? I suggested last week that it should be a public process so that we can all see who's getting interviewed and so on. But so presumably the candidates will come to you or to a committee of ministers, as it did with Ruyter, for further interview. Is that on the card?
As I said, let's wait for the outcome from the board, then I will determine the process. I wasn't aware of your suggestion about a public process, but at the same time, I don't think we want to set the wrong precedents in this environment. When a bank board, for example, interviews candidates for whatever position in a bank or in a commercial institution, they don't run public processes. We are talking about very senior people who are coming in with a fair amount of, let's say, experience and background in business, but in particular this type of business. And I'm not sure how comfortable they will be with that process. But I've just come back. Let me apply my mind, and we'll let you know what the process is.
Thank you, Minister. Yeah, the analogy with the bank and Eskom, I think, are sort of different levels, but nevertheless, the point is taken. The question of you talked about Kahora Basa and other kind of ways of mitigating the load shedding. Topically at the moment is this question of car power ships and the contracts that appear to be fairly one-sided. What is your view about the use of car power ships in the agreement that apparently has been entered into and has been blocked on environmental reasons rather than commercial reasons?
Chair, I haven't followed the details on this particular area. I was aware that sometime last year there was some litigation going on between another entity and I don't know, it's either government or corporation itself. Secondly, generally there'll be a view that any 20-year commitment, which was originally the case to a project like this, which is supposed to be short-term, would be stretching it too far. But beyond that, I'm unable to shed any light on what the current update is on this matter. So I think if you are particularly interested, there might be other people who can help you with the details.
Yeah, Minister. Yeah. Anyway, let's leave it. It seems, yeah. You suggested earlier that the boards appearing to be not invested might be a case of them finding their feet. I think it's 6 months now since they were appointed, and you made the point that they are sort of highly skilled and experienced people there. Is it reasonable for them still to be finding their feet after 6 months? And when would you expect them to be fully in top gear and going flat out?
No, they're going flat out on many issues. There might be certain areas of complexity that they have to deal with, and I think what I was referring to there is whilst focusing on the crisis that they have to focus on our behalf and ensure that Eskom moves in the right direction, notwithstanding the constraints, and minimizes load shedding, because that is what South Africans want. The matters pertaining to follow-ups on the corruption side is something that I said I would raise with them, because I'm not aware of the kind of work that might have happened. And what you found as inadequate responses, I think, could be attributed to finding their feet on that matter. But I don't think one can say that the board is not concerned about corruption, because it interferes with the work of Eskom all the time. And I know they have a fairly active audit and risk committee that will be very concerned, particularly from an internal controls and systems point of view, which I think a lot can be done with in terms of preventing or disrupting some of the processes that might have been put in place that facilitated or could facilitate corrupt activity in the procurement area, which is largely where some of this occurs. Thank you.
Mike Mazamban.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm indifferent to microphones. Mr. Chairman, that's a joke, by the way.
Whether it's a book-based joke. I know, I've read the book.
And the minister hasn't read the book. It's the book that we Minister, you talked about earlier about Chancellor House and the separation of state and party, and the interesting comment for me was that you thought there was a need for that separation to be improved. That's concerning, because it seemed to indicate that you thought there was still too close a relationship between the state and the party, of course, is the party in government. Is that really what you feel?
I think you might be putting words into my mouth, but All I was saying, as a matter of principle, there should be a distinction between party and state. I referred to Chancellor House in the context where the assertion is made that Eskom is a feeding trough for the ANC. I then added that it's not just the so-called ANC that has benefited, that you had a whole plethora of organizations, both multinational and South African, that were stealing from Eskom, to put it in plain and simple terms. Some of whom have been caught, some of which have been caught and have been accounted for. Others, I imagine the SIU and other institutions are still pursuing, including Eskom itself at the end of the day. So there's two issues. First, you can't put everything on the shoulders of the ANC. There are within the ANC very honest, dedicated activists who want the public interest to be primary and who want this country to work. And there might be those few who have engaged, let's call it naughty activity. And whatever the law requires must be done in that particular regard, whether it's a consequence of the Zondo report or any other report that has emerged with sufficient evidence. The second point I'm making is that we often just, and that's where the politicization comes, we're forgetting the billions that were taken out by multinational companies, some of which have been held to account, some of which have not been held to account yet. And the third point associated with that, the South African entities, who were also involved in one or other kind of malfeasance. And they must be dealt with as well at the end of the day. Simple. Thank you.
In conclusion, it's cut.
It's cut. Who's the deputy chair today? Minister, there's absolutely no difference of opinion about the extent of the corruption, not just at Eskom, but throughout the country in many spheres. But you're saying, and I don't think I'm putting words in your mouth, that the ANC was involved, not all members of the ANC, but in the ANC in some form or other, because of a too close a relationship with the state. As I understand it, what you're saying, I would agree with you with that. But what does concern me is that we need to push those two spheres further apart, because the corruption seems to not have dissipated to any great degree. Great, some companies have repaid lots of money thanks to the work of the SIU largely, I think, and not thanks to the work of the Hawks or those sort of people. So that's my point, is that this separation doesn't seem to be as clear as it perhaps should be. And thank you for your honesty in this regard. I don't think I've ever heard an ANC minister say the ANC was culpable in the form of the perhaps Chancellor Hans or whatever. I don't know the details, but yeah. So thank you. I mean, that's great. And I think that all political parties, except mine, are imperfect.
all right, let's.
So, Mr. Chairman, one last question.
That was the last point.
No, Mr. Chairman, I've got one more.
Can we focus on the questions, please, and manage time so that we can release in conclusion?
So, are you one of the ministers who enjoy a privilege of living in a ministerial house that doesn't get exposed to load shedding?
No, I live in my own house in Pretoria, in which I have lived for the past 25 years. And I believe it's described in the book in some way or the other. In Cape Town, I live in a flat, and there's no particular privileges there.
So you don't have
I was
load shedding?
waiting for load shedding at 8:30
All right,
in
Honourable
a day
Member.
municipality last night.
All right.
I need to respond to this comment.
all right.
So, Chair,
Honourable
thank
Member,
you.
stand by. Come in.
There's no question of honesty or dishonesty here. The ANC has made it absolutely clear at its last conference that it is going to eradicate corruption to the best of its ability. It took a clear stance on the corruption issue, wherever it might operate and however it might operate. It supported the outcomes of the, I forget the long title, but let's call it the Zondo Commission for now, and realized that, or rather recognized and embodied in a resolution that it needs to renew itself in every sense of that word in order to better position itself as a representative and a majority representative of South Africans on the political terrain. So it's there. That's the resolution taken by our organization for all to see and hear. But equally, Chair, the attempts by Mr. Lees to save his organization is questionable as well. And that is because you've entered into all sorts of funny alliances over the last 5 or so years at a local government level, and nobody has actually held you to account as to what happened during your terms of office in those municipalities, and who got what tender, and how did they get that tender, and who had oversight of that matter, and who reported on it, and how the spoils were split under your guardianship as an organization. So I think it will be inappropriate, Mr. Lees, with great respect, to take a holier-than-thou approach. We all have our faults. We are human beings. Admit our faults, but commit ourselves to curing the faults as well. Thank you.
All right. Can we come? All right. Honourable Member, let's come back at 20 to 1 because we will wrap up at 2. And can we stick to the Ruyter related matters? 25 to 1 will come back. Thank you.